The Florida Attorney General throws her hat into the ring with the ACC lawsuit.
Conference realignment and expansion is always in the news, so we're back on the big mountain to keep you updated.
Hey, it's good to have you here on the mountain. I am JY. This is my good friend Steve, and if this is your first time on the mountain, we welcome you. We want to do an episode specifically about the Attorney General of the state of Florida and two items that she kind of has ongoing right now, both with FSU. So back in mid-December, we didn't really report this. I'm going to go over it real briefly, but back in mid-December is when she kind of first got involved in this, where she announced that an antitrust probe was going to be going against the College Football Selection Committee. She, and I should have said her name, Attorney General Ashley Moody for the state of Florida, wants answers about the undefeated Seminoles and why they were kept out of the college football playoffs, and if the committee was involved in any anti-competitive conduct. In her wording, there is a need for more information about this unprecedented decision made by a group of 13 in secret that for the first time ever left an undefeated Power 5 conference champion out of the playoffs. Her office is seeking communications from the committee about how it reached its decisions. I will say, if you remember, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers probably saw this, but Boo Corrigan, the chairman of the committee, kind of answered that question publicly, and his quote was, "Florida State University is a different team now than they were through the first 11 weeks of the season." There's your answer, Miss Moody, I think. I'm sure she doesn't like that, but he kind of answered the question. You can disagree with that, and I'm not saying I agree or disagree, but he did answer her question on that on a very broad scale.
Yes.
I also want to point out that Governor Ron DeSantis has set aside $1 million in the state's budget to allow the university to pursue litigation over this issue. So I found that interesting as well. They're definitely putting their hat into the rink from a governmental side of things, political, if you will, side of things. Now, moving it forward, and I say that to say this. Just last week, very, very early January, AG Moody demanded that the ACC release documents regarding the legal battle that has begun between Florida State University and the conference, the ACC. Her office has filed a public records request for the release of several documents, and the ones that I saw laid out specifically are the ACC and ESPN multimedia agreements, the 2014 amended ACC and ESPN multimedia agreements, the actual grant of rights, to which is, like we've said before, under lock and key. Yeah. Nobody can see it. She wants a copy of it. Other agreements with ESPN and other agreements between the ACC and the Walt Disney Company. Obviously, the Walt Disney Company, owners of ESPN. She demands that these be released no later than 10 days after the request. I believe the date of the request was the 3rd. It was either the 3rd or the 4th, but I believe it was the 3rd. According to AG Moody, these documents are the basis for the fees in excess of more than $500 million in penalties to FSU. She states that according to both North Carolina and Florida state laws, these agreements are all public records. I'm going to get back to that here in a second. But according to her and the laws in both her state and what she says the laws are in North Carolina, they're public records. Interestingly, the ACC has filed a motion aimed at keeping the ESPN agreement sealed, saying that the terms and conditions of the deal cannot be disclosed to the public because they constitute a trade secret, which has protection under the North Carolina State's Trade Secrets Protection Act. So the pissing match between these two, and a lot of people, but here's another little side pissing match, right? Mm-hmm. The AG's kind of throwing her in. You can see what she wants, and you can see where the ACC is saying, not so fast. We think because of this North Carolina act, you can't have it. So I have some thoughts. I want to throw it to you here real quick, Steve, and see if you have any comments. Specifically, I want to kind of stay more focused on kind of the new news. I'm not too worried about the CFP. I just said that because and these are separate. She has two separate things going. One with the conference committee or the selection committee, and one with the ACC conference. So anything with that conference.
Give you some quick general. I want to give everyone some quick general thoughts on this. Not maybe to drill down specifically, but in general, I think it's never a great idea when we get politicians involved in sports and how these are done, how the sausage is made, because it just keeps opening more and more. It's like Pandora's box. It keeps opening more and more and more. So I think, and this individual, not only is she a politician, but she's also a legal officer. Basically, she's a lawyer. She can bring charges.
Right.
She represents the state of Florida.
Right.
In legal matters. So I think this just even opens up more when you have just a straight up governor or a politician just talking. That's one thing.
Sure.
When you have an attorney general who can file these, it's going to get even more dangerous. And I think it brings in a lot of danger to all sides.
Yeah.
Florida State. The other schools, the ACC, it's just danger. That's what I think about all this.
Okay. A couple things I want to put out more from can she do this or can't she? And again, we're not lawyers. We're laymen. We try to put forth some of our knowledge and what we do, but we're certainly not lawyers. I think I want to point out just a couple pieces to this. First of all, the ACC is a non-public entity. Okay? It's not a governmental entity.
Right.
It's a non-public entity. The board meetings of nonprofits and non-public entities typically are not open to the public. They don't need to be open to the public. Their finances, by and large, are filed to the IRS in a Form 990. I'm going to get a little geeky on everybody here, but on a Form 990, and that is made to the public. So you say, okay, well, their meetings don't have to be. What does have to be open to the public? Well, their Form 990 does. It's a financial document. There's also a lot of information it gives you the board members or trustees. It gives you a lot of other, what are they there for? What do they do? There's a lot of informational. I think the IRS actually calls it an informational filing. Also, their exempt applications must be available to the public. However, I will say with that, if there's any supporting documentation, typically, if there's any supporting documentation to that application, that material can be redacted or not supplied. And what types of material can be not supplied? Number one, trade secrets. Number two, patents. Number three, processes. Anything in terms of national defense material. So, if there are things, again, the very first one that I saw in terms of this definition, trade secrets. What's the ACC saying? It's a trade secret. I'm not going to sit here and judge that and say it is or it isn't. I couldn't tell you if it is or it isn't. But they're trying to use the laws that they have to say, you're not going to get this document, and here's why you're not going to get this document. I also think it's interesting that the ACC has begun the process of saying this is a trade secret under the Protection Act. And yeah, you're not going to get it. So again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to figure out whether or not that's going to work or not going to work. But they have already answered that question with basically a no, and here's why. Now, somebody will have to rule whether or not it is a trade secret under that act. I don't really know. But even if it is, I'll go down one more step and say, okay, they lose this. It's not a trade secret. But so it does have to be made. I can guarantee you, if it's made, it is going to be heavily redacted. And the redactions will probably have legal reasons behind it. So even if this is open, we're not going to get the grant of rights that you and I can sit here and read verbatim with nothing being redacted. That's not going to happen. And I don't think AG Moody's going to get that either. I don't know. I shouldn't say I don't think she's going to get it, because I literally just said I'm not going to sit here and judge it. I don't know if she's going to get it. The other thing I would bring up, I saw a comment as I was researching this about the Freedom of Information Act and whether or not that applies here. To me, that wouldn't apply, because I think that's specific to governmental entities. I don't think it would apply to the ACC as a non-public, non-governmental entity. But I saw that brought up. I thought I'd just throw that out there. So anything with that, Steve, that in terms of my opinions, and again, I'm trying not to judge it, although I did make a boo-boo there and said I don't think she's going to get it. Maybe she will. Anything else there you got?
So here's the thing is, and we talked about this a lot in the Pac-12 situation. So this has really never been tested. There's not a lot of court cases.
Yes.
Here's the thing, is the conference itself may be a non-governmental, non-public entity, but you have a mixture of public and private universities coming together to form an agreement, okay? Some of these public schools, they have certain laws and rules and regulations in their own states, okay? But then they're also participating in commerce across state lines.
Yes.
So I think that it's just it's really, there's so much that can be interpreted one way or the other, and obviously the one side is going to say, well, it can't be because of this.
Right.
The other side, Florida AG is going to say, Florida State is a public entity.
Right.
Taxpayers are funding. In the state of Florida, no taxpayer dollars will be used unless we can see the information, and we have to approve those taxpayer funds.
Right.
So that's what the battle is going to be, and they're trying to stake out their territory in North Carolina versus Florida. I think if both sides carry this all the way down the line, I think you could see this going to federal court and eventually the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court. So there's a lot of risk for both sides. And there's not a lot of established case law. Each side is going to probably try and cite some things, but neither one of those really is a conference made up of these public and private schools and fighting an agreement like this. The other thing I'll mention is, and it kind of goes back to your other page.
Okay.
ESPN.
Yes.
So right now, a lot of the fight is between Florida State and the ACC.
Right.
There is an opportunity for ESPN to get drug into this with the whole grant of rights.
Yes.
ESPN, like you said, the parent company is based out of Florida. There's already been a lot of friction between the politicians in the state of Florida against Disney, the parent company of ESPN. How does that factor into it? And you may see where there's some issues being decided in North Carolina court because of certain things, and other issues being decided if you have Florida State versus Disney at some points, or some of these schools versus Disney. Some of that, the jurisdiction may be in the state of Florida.
Right.
Really crazy. So that's pretty much my overall thoughts.
And I have two comments on that. First one, the Walt Disney thing. I found it really interesting to see them say, and it is a catch-all, right? The parent company is the Walt Disney Company, but it's also Florida versus the Walt Disney Company. I mean, that's been in the news now for quite a while. DeSantis versus we're not a political show. I'm not trying to get into the politics. But it was interesting. They, of course, have to put the Walt Disney Company, in my opinion, for an overarching thing, but also because that's one of their driving politics. I'm glad you mentioned that. I kind of thought that when I saw that. I want to get back to the other thing that you said before we wrap up about that grayness between these call it governmental entities and non-public entities. And it's funny, as I was researching this, I actually read an article. It wasn't about universities, but it was about that loophole. And they literally called it a loophole between governmental entities and foundations and other nonprofits, where they can filter funds through these nonprofits because they are not under these public records requests like the federal government is. And is it a loophole? Yeah, or call it a loophole, or call it it's made that way. Yeah. It's made that way. Right. But anyway, and so does it apply? It doesn't, and it is a lot of gray area. And if we want an answer to that question, forget FSU or forget Florida State and the state of Florida and the ACC. Any governmental entity and any nonprofit entity, that's a whole different ball of wax or can of worms that would have to go to the federal level, because there is not, to your point, there is not a lot of guidance on that, and it happens everywhere.
And I have a feeling if both sides continue to push this and not settle, I think we're going to go down that road. So I'm hoping we get a chance to talk about that article, because I think this subject's going to continue to come up.
Perfect. Well, hey, with that, we'll keep this one a little short, but I wanted to, this isn't necessarily new news. It did happen last week. I know we got a comment on our last one that we did a clickbait one on Monday. We're not trying to do clickbait. We're just two guys that we can't always get together. We try to get together 2 times a week, and sometimes it's a little bit old, if you will. We're not a breaking news channel. We're more of we're going to give you the facts, we're going to digest it, and we might give you our opinions based on that, like you're hearing here. But by no means are we going to be a breaking news channel, and by no means are we clickbait. We want to try to give you guys valid information. So
if you want the latest headlines, open up your ESPN app and read the 5-second headline.
There you go.
For us, we love to do these deep dives, look at the things that maybe don't make the headlines.
Right.
dig in a little deeper and discuss them.
And there's not a lot on this AG. I mean, as I was doing it, you get some Florida news channels that are into it. But in terms of national, yes, there's that ESPN headline, but it's a copy and paste from what they're getting from the locals or whatever. So anyway, hey, with that, we'll wrap it up. We thank you for watching. Give us a like if you like this content. Make sure you subscribe if you like this content, because we are going to stay on this. We're planning another episode specific to the grant of rights that we're going to try to get out early next week. And with that, hey, we thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on The Big Mountain.